Good morning everyone and welcome to the first Corkeen Talks event. My name is Michael Hammer and I am the CEO of Corkeen Europe. And I have 17 years of experience in the playground industry. I started my first company when I was already in high school. My friends, they decided to proceed with their studies in universities, and I made the decision to start building playgrounds. And this is very nice to see all of you people attending this first Corkeen Talks. And I would like to just inform you with the fact that we will record this session, and the purpose for this is to be able to let other people not being able to see this live, to be able to watch it afterwards. And a lot of you might be in touch now with Corkeen for your first time, and I would like to clarify what Corkeen is all about. Corkeen is a brand that is working with a safe desurfacing product based on cork for the playground industry. And myself joined forces together with Amorim Cork Composites. This was back in 2019 when we decided to launch Corkeen. And Amorim Cork Composites, it's a business unit within the Amorim Group, and which, by the way, has more than 150 years of experience with cork. And the mission with Corkeen is to build playgrounds based on cork that are safe and sustainable. And this also includes leisure spaces. And the idea is to do this for everyone. And when it comes to Corkeen Talks, this is the first session we have. And the idea behind Corkeen Talks is to invite interesting people within the playground industry to address relevant topics. And this is in order to address this towards landscape architects and the customers within the playground industry. So I will guide you through the agenda that we have today. So you will be able to have a better understanding of what we will use the upcoming 2 hours with. And first of all, we will have our first guest speaker, Helena Menezes, and she is representing her own company, Menezes Risk Vision. And during her presentation, we are happy if you would like to address your questions in the chat box. You will find the chat box in the bottom of your screen, and there you can address your questions during Helena's presentation. Then we will have a 15-minute Q&A session with your questions, and feel free to address any questions to our guest speakers today. Afterwards, we will run a video of the Corkeen system, but also there will be a video as a testimonial from the Lisbon City Council from Helena Barros Gomes. And then we have our second guest speaker, which will be Harry Harbottle, and he will address the topic creative compliance, and he represents the company Kate Consultancy. And the same here, when you're listening to Harry's presentation, feel free to address all your questions in the chat box, and then we will address those questions to Harry and discuss them after his presentation. There is also a section here for future topics. We will have a poll to ask you and to sort of source the ideas for our future topics from the audience today. And we will also discuss potential developments for the Corkeen system going forward. And at the end of the agenda, we will have the final conclusions. Then I will invite also Helena and Harry to join to discuss the takes we've had from this first Corkeen Talks. So with that said, I would like to introduce our first guest speaker, Helena Menezes. She has a quite ambitious resume. She's been working and focusing on health for children, and she has tried to see this from an architect's perspective. She has nearly 30 years of experience from the playground industry, and she has been working in the European playground, working to develop the European playground standard. She has been the co-author of several technical reports related to the standard, and I would call her a true influencer in this industry. So please welcome Helena Menezes.
Hello, good morning to all. First of all, I would like to thank Corkeen for this initiative and for the invitation and for trusting my work. And we will have like 30 minutes just to give you a brief introduction on the playground standards and how they can help us to do safer and more challenged playgrounds for children. So let's start. And I always like to start by remembering our public children. And because we are really talking about services, or how do we give children nice environments so that they can really feel some freedom that they have lost, especially in urban environments. So we know that children play everywhere, and really they just look at the environment wherever they are and they will play with whatever comes to their hand. So even when we put a lot of information, warnings, I really like this picture with a lot of instructions, and where we can see a lot of children and adults playing just because it's inviting. So what we are talking here is not about behaving well children, but really, how do they really behave as a natural behavior? What is the natural action of all of us? I think that even for us adults, when it's forbidden, then it's really even more desirable, let's say. So human nature is really to respond to what the environment offers us. And that's why we are talking about design. Because in nature, we don't think about design and about what we can do or not do. We just respond. We play with anything. And that's a concept that has also been developed by Gibson. Affordance, it's what can the environment afford? What are the invitations? And this is all about free play. That's what we're talking about here. We want to provide to children that are more and more in urban areas that are much more designed for cars. How can we invite them to still develop all their abilities and feel autonomous and that they are not constricted and play a little bit more. So we know that decisions are driven by perception of what is offered to us, okay? And that we also play together, we live together. So society is not divided in small age groups. So when we see children playing, like here on the left, even the parents or anything, we don't say, stop this. We look at this structure and it looks okay, so we let them just hang there. But as soon as we move to the play areas, what has been offered to children, like has been designed for children, then it's like if our risk perception and changes, because now suddenly we have someone that has designed the place to play. So now suddenly we have someone we can blame. And I think that is very much this issue that makes people, designers, afraid of, sometimes afraid of creating, of being creative and having different areas for children. It's because suddenly, in many countries, there's been a lot of liability issues. Even if a child breaks one tooth while playing, then you have someone to blame. Here, it would be more like the parents allow the children to play. Here, you are offering a place to play. So what is important here is that we realize that the level of risk acceptance varies with the situation, with the circumstances. And especially when, for instance, when there's an accident, parents are very emotional. It's normal. But then how can we feel safe to design, now I'm talking about the safety of adults, to design places where children can still explore as they normally do, okay? So what we want to know is how to maintain this freedom of play wherever they are playing, wherever they are living, because that's where children play, wherever they are, okay? So what we want to see the difference here is also about risk perception, that's what children will respond to, and risk assessment, which will have a more professional approach. And that's what we are talking about, and that's what standards also allow to us, okay? So how to maintain the benefits of play without fear? I think for this, we need to have a quick look at the legal framework for playgrounds, okay? Because in Europe, even if we don't have any national laws, there is always some legal framework for playgrounds. First of all, you have the building regulation, the European building regulation. And what I like to point out here is that it says that the works should be safe for normal or normally predictable use, okay? And you have the General Product Safety Directive for any product that is on the market. And it says that only safe products can be on the market. And again, safety comes, that is safe by design, for intended and foreseeable use. So what we are talking about as a predictable use is this way that children have, this exploring behavior that is so predictable in children. So we want to have safe structures that children can use in this predictable way, exploring in any way imaginable, okay? So how to be legally safe? The standards are just one of the tools. The General Product Safety Directive says you have to show how you make your product safe. So standards are a voluntary technical reference, okay, to for industry, that was in the first place for industry, for this legal compliance. Because standards came up first, European standards, for the free movement of goods in Europe, okay, to support this horizontal legislation with the technical detail. And so it will set some minimum criteria for compliance. They are absolute dynamic documents. We have systematic reviews of all European standards every 5 years. So it's not a static document. Decisions are made by consensus or voting. And so we really set the minimums that we need to be able to produce and for goods to circulate freely, okay? But any new product coming to the market will have to comply with the General Product Safety Directive, at least, if there is not a specific law for that product, okay? It's important to understand that when we talk about playground standards, we are talking about equipment and surfacing and products. But when we're talking about playground design, we need to be able to make a safe combination, let's say, of all these products And all these products together, they will have they will create a different dynamics. Okay, together the product in itself and the use they are offering, the way they will be explored. Okay, so if you see this boy here is sitting on the top of the beam of a swing, and if you were watching him, because I was watching him, he even lie down and he stayed there in the sun for quite a while the kids underneath him were swinging. So this is not in the standard. You don't think that the child will be up there, but he will. So when you're designing, you just have to see which kind of environment are you going to offer, what will be created. And you just want that if children are exploring this way, that they will not get hurt by the structure and not because of their behavior. So we need to think about how to use the standards at design stage. The risk assessment must be done at design stage, okay? So that we really can say, use the standards as a useful tool, or are we going to continue this, sometimes this wondering if really the standards do not allow us to do anything. They just kill creativity. We cannot have challenging areas for children. Is this a myth or reality? If we really want to use the standards as a tool, we need to understand what the standard says. And the playground standards, if you look at it, it starts in the introduction with the definition of the terms that are used most used in the standard. And these are the shall, the should, especially the shall and the should. The shall is what really are requirements for the product, and very often for the producer to have a certification. Okay, of course, then you have to understand that the shalls are a requirement for compliance, but we have more than 230 shalls in the standard, and not all of them, I mean, most of them don't have a specific means of validation. And that means that at design stage, either you're designing a product or designing the playground, so making all the combinations, if you are using standard equipment, because you can also do other things, you have to show during your design process which methods you have used for your risk assessment, okay? And then you have also more than 40 shoulds, and the should are recommendations that you should take into account during your design process. You have to decide, you have to look at your local circumstances and to see what you can offer with the space you have, with the environment around it. Is it urban? Is it more natural? You need to know what is there. The recommendations are like guidelines. So if this happens, then maybe you should do this. And this is happening, for instance, for overlapping of safety areas. Okay, they are not forbidden, but it doesn't tell you how to do the overlapping, but it tells you when you should not do overlapping. Okay, so you need to know what is happening there. And then you also have a lot of you may do this, and you can do that. I'm talking about this just to show you that the standard is not a black and white document. Many people just think about dimensions, millimeters. It's just minimums. It's just the standard is made also on a hazard-based approach. So it's also to give you the link to anthropometric data on children, how it was thought. But it's not a black and white document. There are many gray areas, a lot of room for decision. And it also says at least 4 times that you need to use risk assessment to make a design option. Okay, and one of them, it really says you shall do risk assessment for this, to decide on this. Okay, and this is all in the introduction of the standard. And many times people don't read the introduction. They jump into the standard to look for a dimension, a millimeter, and that's not the point. That's not the purpose. So the introduction is really important because it also starts by saying that it is not the purpose of the requirements in this standard to lessen the contribution that playground equipment makes to children's development. Okay, so don't skip the introduction when you go to the standard. Another important point is that this new edition from 2017 also brings us in the forward. It really says that this part of the standard, part 1, 1176 part 1, should be read in conjunction with 7 technical reports. CEN is the European Committee for Standardization. These technical reports give you a lot of precious information that really can assist in the interpretation of the standards, of the requirements and the recommendations. Why are these requirements here? Why this recommendation? And these technical reports provide a lot of criteria for risk-benefit assessment, which I leave for Harry later on, when designing a play area. So just quickly, these CEN reports, the main ones, one of them is about play accessible to all. The other one, the rationales, explain almost clause by clause the risk that is behind the requirements. What are we trying to address? Why are we saying that this should or shall be like this? We also have, I was going to say hundreds, but not hundreds, but many interpretation requests that we've had over the years. And I am a member of the interpretation panel for this standard for almost, I think, 20 years. So all the requests that come from all over the world about interpretation of the standard, we have to draft an answer that is then validated by member states. And this technical report also has all these questions. And I think everyone could have the same kind of questions. But it is quite an interesting document to look at also. And then the later report was about citing, with advice on methods for positioning and separation of different activities. So this one really gives good references when you're designing a play area of, it's not about what you should do, but it's how to as a rationale for your decisions. And that's what you need, to not be afraid of being creative. And also this standard is very clear about injuries and accidents. It is very clear from the standard when you read it in the introduction that we are expecting accidents to happen. We know when children are moving, when children are exploring, when children are finding out about their own abilities, that there will be something happening. But the purpose of the standard is just to prevent accidents with a disabling or fatal consequence. And these are the words really written in the standard. These are not my words. So it's very, very, very clear that we know that during play, something may happen, but we want to reduce the seriousness of any consequence as much as possible. That's what the requirements are for. The standard also wants to ensure this a proper level of safety, which means an acceptable level of risk that will not stop children from getting the best out of the play. Okay. And then also in the scope, and this is the part I would like to focus on, is that playground design should protect the child from hazards that they might be unable to foresee. And when we talked about the General Product Safety Directive, if you remember, we said that a safe product is when it is used in a foreseeable way. And so the children also have to be able to foresee what can happen when they really, when they jump from a height, or what could happen. Of course, they can have a surprise, but what is not acceptable is if there is a hidden hazard, because then you don't have free choice in risk-taking. And that's the purpose of this, is that you provide a challenging environment, but so that the risk involved in play is apparent and foreseeable by the child. By the child, of course, the carer, if it's a very small child or less able child, okay? So we should be able to perceive existing risks. And now the existing risks are those intentional risks that we know will be on the play area. There are risks. If you want to climb high, if you want to swing, move fast, we need to accept that risks will be there. We are not trying to have risk-free play areas, okay? So the designer task is to create a challenging, inclusive, and safe environment for play, but safe in that sense that the risk is perceivable. The risk can be anticipated. It's not a surprise that if you jump, you can maybe break an arm, or that's part of it. But it's good if you break your arm, because that means that you use your hands to protect the head. And that's what we do as humans. We know that we have to protect ourselves. So when you jump, you know what kind of movement you're going to use, okay? So we are not looking for this risk-free area. We are looking for a challenging area. Even if a child gets a little bit hurt, that's a learning part of the learning process, okay? So when we look at the standard, what kind of requirements it gives us, as I said before, it has to do with, it's a hazard-based approach. So the standard will give us some guideline, this is sometimes requirements, of course, when we are producing the equipment, about the materials you use, for instance. And it's very clear that they should not be toxic, about toxicity for the environment and for human health. Then it talks about structural resistance, about stability, so that it will not collapse when the children are using it, about the kind of openings you can have, so that the children, when moving, freely moving, do not get trapped in the equipment, for instance, in the middle of a fall. They are not trapped on top by their clothes or part of the body that could then lead to some kind of either strangulation or amputation. This is what we are worried about. And this is in the equipment, okay? Or moving parts like crushing parts of the body. And then also about safety areas. And those safety areas are really important for safe use. Safety areas means that you can really explore and move around the equipment with, I really like to set this because it's these safety areas are minimum dimensions, so that you can fall without hitting an obstacle, without getting trapped on the way from the height where you fall to the ground. And also about impact areas, about surfacing. So these are when you are designing an area, the layout issues that you should refer to, but not to follow exactly the millimeters that are there. You just need to know what are your minimums, when can you do this kind of overlapping, and then you have to make a decision on design. You really have to make this risk-benefit assessment at the design stage to see what you will be offering, okay? It also has this standard, the 1176 part 1, the requirements for impact attenuating surfaces. Very often people concentrate on another standard, 1177, but that standard only has some methods to be able to say that you are offering this adequate level of impact attenuation. Okay, this is a new concept in this new edition of the standard, on this 2017 edition. The properties for attenuation, they were already there. And just because you have properties for attenuation, it means that the standard acknowledges that there will be falls. And what we want in attenuation is reduce the risk of serious consequences when there is a fall. Okay, so for the impact surfacing, the standard only requires the toxicity of materials to be aware of that, and the properties for attenuation. So about material, the toxicity of materials, this has to do with the producer. The properties for attenuation, you have the beginning, the playground will start, but then of course these properties will only be maintained if you have some risk management in place and you have maintenance. It's impossible to have the same level for the whole life cycle, but there are ways to monitor and to make this risk management. But for impact attenuation, the surfacing, and for the materials, there are also other criteria that you have to think about that are not specifically in the standard. For the choice, you have to think about play value, the diversity of opportunities, accessibility and inclusion, the type of equipment and the type of play that you are offering and that you want to induce, so the kind of affordance you want to create again, maintenance, and of course, sustainability is also very, very important. And you have to think about the whole life cycle. And this is still at the design stage. And again, these technical reports that I mentioned, like the Play for All, will also give you some indications on some criteria important for this choice of material. Also to remind you that the methods to determine impact attenuation, they are in the 1177 standard, they are mostly thinking about head protection, okay? Oops. So, as we have seen here, this standard will talk about more about the equipment, the surfacing, and not at all about child behavior. So it should allow all this natural child behavior and the exploring. And it's definitely not black and white. So this is something sometimes that producers and inspectors like, when it says complies, not complies, complies, not complies. But this is not easy to do. And the standard does not look for that. It really asks for this risk assessment, gives you a lot of room for creativity, because you will have to do a lot of options at design stage, okay? It requires professional judgment to understand and to see what you can pick up from the standard to really offer these more challenging areas. There is much room for creativity, but for this, you need really to be a competent person using this. And I also like to say it's not one competent person. You need a multidisciplinary team of people that understand about child development, about child needs, about materials, about, of course, the standard. But I mean, it's easier when you work on a team where you have also different perceptions, because what you have to decide really is, what is the acceptable risk? Where do I draw the line for what I'm offering in my design project? Okay, you will need always risk assessment, and the standards will be there to help you on your decisions. And again, I tell you, please refer to the introduction and to the scope of the standard. You can literally extract some sentences from there to justify the presence of risk and look at risk as challenge, and not, so we have the good risk and the bad risk. The bad risk is the one that really, well, you cannot see the hazard, or can really, that you can lead to serious injury. But so you can use the standard to really justify your design options, okay? To find details that are beneficial to child development, so they can really find their best, be autonomous and feel free. They're not always with adults say, don't do this, don't do that, don't be afraid. Using the standards also help you to review the known hazards, because they have been identified in the standard, okay? You can use for the minimum dimensions just minimum dimensions, not to use the minimum that they say, but to know with what can you play to offer a space where they can run or they can be together. You have a lot of information there. So it is also a very reliable basis for the implementation of the risk management system. And the risk management system that is in place, that's what will give you the confidence, okay, to do a good design, because it will be there for liability purposes. I would like to give you an example here before we finish, of a kindergarten in Tokyo. I love this project. I haven't been there personally, but I've watched many, many videos, and also the concept. Here you have a small space and you need to build this kindergarten. So it's 2-story kindergarten, and it's round, as you can see, and it has integrated the existing trees in the building, okay? Existing trees are there, but you place some nets here to avoid falling. And you even have a slide from the top floor down here. And the ground is not level. So even although it's in the building, you can create modeling on the ground. And children, when you monitor the children here, they would walk or run an average of 4,000 meters per day, just because of the way this is built and induces all the movement. We need children to be active. Okay, so in this case, it doesn't follow exactly the European standard in all things, but if it would, it wouldn't change the function and the challenge. But it's beautiful how you can build a place creative and for children to have a lot of fun and movement, although it's in a small space. Okay, and another thing also, just to remind you that an area can be not exactly complying with the standard and still be with an acceptable risk. And in other situations, and that's my last slide, you can have an area a play area that complies with the standard, and the level of risk is not acceptable. Because if it's too boring, then we may have an acceptable risk. And because children will have to find really a way to explore in a dangerous way. So what I would like to finish with is by telling you that the standard allows for both a very boring and what we call the KFC playground, like from a catalog kid fence carpet, or a very wild playground. The standard allows for both, because we are talking about structural safety. So that means that you really have to be brave. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know the standard if you really want to create challenging places, play areas for children. You just have to know how to use the standard on your side, and to be on the legal side, to be on the safe side, and to really create amazing, amazing areas for children. The standard allows both, but especially it allows for these very wild areas where children will never forget when they grow up. So remember, as a designer, you are the creator of a world for children. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Helena. Very inspiring. And with your experience in the industry, I think you are a great influencer here to everyone attending this webinar. So we have a few questions, and please address them in the chat. And for you who have raised your hand, we would like also you to express your questions in the chat, because it's kind of complicated to distribute the microphone when we are so many people. So one of the questions that we have here is there any evidence in terms of severe injuries since the first introduction to the standards in 1998? Can we say something about the sort of the impact to injuries of children? how it has been developed since 1998 till today.
Yes, we can really see a big difference since '98 with the first introduction of the standards. We had a big difference in injuries, and the first things were that, for instance, by having some surfacing, and also the equipment, limiting a little bit the height of the free height of fall of the equipment, because when you used to have, for instance, a very high slide, like 5 meters high, with a free fall to the ground. So these kind of things have been, by the standard, have been, let's say, restricted in a way. So you can still have the feeling of height without falling from a height directly into a hard ground or full of obstacles. So the kind of things we also changed with the standard, for instance, the swings. We had these very heavy swing seats, and children would get them on the head because of moving, or like 3 or 4 swings in the same beam. All of this has been limited with the standard. So you can still swing, but you don't need to be, well, you go to the middle of a swing beam to get caught. But when we did the second edition of the standard, we still had very bad accidents with trapping. So for instance, getting caught when going down a slide by your clothes. So we had to refine. Every time we do a revision of the standard, we really go to very bad accidents. They are not very frequent, but they are very bad. So I can tell you for that, with the last edition, this 2017 edition, one of the worst accidents we were looking at, and we had several fatal accidents with equipment that was collapsing on children. And this is specifically when it's one post equipment, so when the stability relies on one post only. So the standard, this third edition, for instance, we have more stringent requirements for one post equipment on the stability. And the stability is not only on the design of the equipment. Of course, if it's one post, then you'll have more stability issues, but it's also on the standard requirements for the installation. And that's the producer that has to give good requirements for installation, and then for inspection and maintenance. So here I focus mostly on design, but the standard also gives us a lot of things on design of the equipment, but also on the operation of the playground.
Right. Thank you very much, Helena. And regarding natural play, we start seeing a trend where kids are playing more and more in an area that is more or less like a forest. Or how would you say that the standards could comply to play where you could have some natural risks, for example, like a tree across a divide of 2 banks, for example? How can we comply with the standard and at the same time inspire designers to come up with natural play areas?
Well, the natural play, if you're really talking about nature, there's no standards there. But if you like with the school, you take children to the nature, you have to know the risks. That's about risk management. You have to know if there are a lake or a river nearby. You have to know if the trees, if you're using trees, like in the kindergarten I showed you, of course the tree, it's not to do about the standard, but you can use the standard to remind you about the hazards you should think about. The tree should be healthy. If the children hang on the tree branch, the tree cannot just break on their head. So you can always use the standard to remind you of the type of risk you have to think about. But when you are designing, if you want to incorporate a tree, for instance, you have to, it should not be on the way sliding down a slide, right? So you can still use it. He should be here with us at this moment. But he will also address that the natural environment is not about standards. The standards, as I said before, it's about products. So when you have a commercially sourced product, because the standard in the scope says that if it's not commercially sourced, then it's not a certification issue. Okay?
Right.
But you still have to have the risk management.
And I think Harry also, if you don't mind to join us here also for the Q&A, so feel free to unmute and bring your perspective to this also if you want.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I don't see myself on screen, but that doesn't matter. Probably a bonus.
We can see you, Harry, so yeah, everything's
okay.
fine.
Oh yeah, no, yes,
Yeah.
we can see you now.
No, I agree with Helena. The standard doesn't cover these the natural features, but you would do a normal risk assessment and a more dynamic risk assessment in relation to natural things, because these things change with weather and so on and time in a different way than fixed equipment does. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Harry. We have one question also from the chat regarding parents worrying about the toxicity of tires in playgrounds, namely in kindergarten and schools. What do you think about this? This is for Helena.
Yeah, well, the tires it's a different issue. I'm also on the technical committee for end of use tires because yes, they used to be very toxic. They are very toxic, but there is also a directive from 2010 where you limit the contents of some of these toxic elements in there. So the tires, the problem is that the way you select tires to use in playgrounds, and this is something that is still happening. The standards are under development. They are being developed right now, how to select tires that can be used for playgrounds. The tires that are produced in Europe tend to have less toxicity, but still, the tires have several materials: the rubber, metal, textile, and they are used, recycled for many uses. But for playgrounds and sports grounds, it's really something that it's really a discussion, public discussion. The way they are used. I personally get much more concerned when they are used for smaller children, like in kindergarten or even smaller children, because they are in very close contact with it. And then they put their hands in the mouth. So I think we should be very careful to use products from end-of-life tires. And that's what we are doing with the standards now, is that you have to know the origin of the tires. And until now, you don't know where they're coming from. And this is the problems there. They are being more and more monitored. And the playground standard says that you cannot have this kind of toxicity. So you have to comply with the REACH regulation, which is another European regulation about substances that are in the products. This is something that we ask people to more and more be aware of and ask for the origin of products. Where, if you are buying a batch of I'm talking about municipalities and schools, you should require really good information about the origin of the product. So the date production of tires, and the where they have been manufactured also has an influence on the toxicity. That's what we are finding, okay, in all the studies.
Right, thank you, Helena. And Harry, you wanted to add something here also?
Yeah, just to put this in context, the two risks are from contact, from touch, and migration of materials. And really, in the test, this needs prolonged prolonged contact to be a real danger. And secondly, regarding particles, the tiny particles that come off from the rubber, every time a car brakes in the street, tiny particles come off. And this is a much, much, much bigger danger than anything that's on playgrounds, because the air is full of these particles in every city. And they're not doing the same controls on car tires as people are wanting to put on playgrounds. So let's have it in a context, please.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
I think that I'd just like to add this, and I fully agree with Harry that with the car tires, the exposure is much bigger. But still, when it's with this contact, that's why I don't like when you have the in the surface, especially when they are completely the black tire with the particles in the surface when you have it in small children, kindergarten, when they are still crawling. That's a specific thing. But I totally agree with Harry that this is an environment issue with tires.
Correct. And probably that's a hard one to solve in the short-term perspective also, because we don't really see a lot of alternatives for the time being to car tires, really. Yeah. And one question here,
Michael, just a small thing. One thing is to use a big tire, a whole tire for play. The other thing is the particle in the surface that is there every day when children spend 8 hours a day in the school.
Right. And how do you see this differently, Helena, when you say that using a car tire? Are you thinking of a car tire for a swing, or a car tire that is more or less attached to the ground where you can
car
jump?
Tire for the swing. But again, you have to select a little bit. You can have to, if it's in good condition. A car tire for the swing, it's great because it also has a lot of impact attenuation. It's softer than a hard swing. If it's used in the correct way, or hanging from a tree, it's different than having an enormous extent for children to crawl on every day. That's not.
And one last question now for you, Helena. We have 1 more minute here. Do you think that parents nowadays, that they believe the playgrounds are safer to their kids than they actually are?
Well, it's an interesting question. When it looks very bright and painted, some parents may still be misled that they are safer, because sometimes they relax. But the interesting thing is that parents are looking more and more for natural environments. And that's because maybe they don't think that the playgrounds are as safe as that, and they need more challenge. And the natural environment in nature, you never know what you'll find. So I think you cannot talk about parents as a whole, because there are many, many parents that are waking up. And when everything is in order, like in the playground that has been designed, that's not how life is. Life is a little bit more chaotic. So we need a little bit more surprises and more natural environment, or looking more environment, not so organized, not so clean. So I think many parents are waking up for this need for children to be more confident about themselves. So when it's too safe, then it's no longer safe, because then children will not be able to develop their skills.
It's a fine balance there, really. But this is something that we will definitely continue talking about, and also during the conclusions. So thank you very much, Helena, for your participation, your presentation, very interesting. And also thank you, Harry, so far for your input as well. So now we will proceed with a video regarding the Corkeen system, and it will be followed also by a testimonial from the city of Lisbon.
Thank you.
Sem dúvida que a permeabilidade, eu diria que para nós é excepcionalmente importante, porque evitamos assim impermeabilizar largas áreas que de outra forma e com outro tipo de material somos obrigados a fazê-lo, e ajuda-nos a equilibrar a área permeável versus a área impermeável dentro de um grande parque urbano, por exemplo. A maleabilidade e a elasticidade que nos permite obter as condições de segurança necessárias a cumprir a legislação, nomeadamente nas áreas de queda dos equipamentos. E outra que eu penso que também é muito importante, que é este, chamar-lhe conforto. Conforto não só para quem anda em cima do pavimento, como termicamente é muito mais agradável ter um pavimento com um agregado natural do que algo aborrachado que transmite calor e que torna, principalmente nas condições que a nossa cidade cada vez mais tem, de ilhas de calor muito grandes, é muito bom podermos contar com um material que, ao invés de contribuir para o aumento de temperatura, consegue equilibrar e, quem sabe, com o que disse de ser negativo em termos de carbono, até equilibrarmos outras soluções que às vezes não conseguimos obter tanto material e tanta técnica de sustentabilidade adequada. Bom, hoje em dia, de facto, podemos considerá-la uma solução disruptiva por ser tão inovadora. Estamos habituados a conviver com a cortiça noutras aplicações completamente diferentes, e o facto de podermos utilizar a cortiça, neste caso em particular, numa solução técnica que a nós, projetistas, nos satisfaz plenamente, é de facto disruptivo.
So, now we are continuing with our second guest speaker. He is a representative of the Committee for the Creation of the Standard, a co-author of a guide to the standard for the safety of playground equipment. He is also a member of the International Standard Organization. And I would say he's one of the most experienced within the playground industry from the UK. So please welcome Harry Harbottle.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for the opportunity to address your participants. And I say good morning to everybody, certainly in Europe, and for others such as Sean in New Zealand and others in other time zones, good evening. I hope to illustrate in the next 30 minutes, whereas of course you should comply with the standard, but you shouldn't be overly constrained with that standard. The context in which I do this is not only when we're talking about something nice to do, we're talking here about children's rights. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child lays down those rights, and Article 31 talks about the entitlement to take part in physical activities and play, and the opportunity to experience and judge and manage risk. So we are bearing in mind that nearly all countries in the world have signed up to this convention. In Scotland, where I live, for example, they're now enshrining it in the actual national law. So we're talking here about children's entitlement to risk. Sorry, get the technology right there. Oops. Helena has already mentioned that risk-taking is considered in the standard, in the foreword of the standard, and I would reiterate her strong point that you should read the context, the introduction and the scope of the standard, as well as just the essential requirements of the standard. Clearly, it's not about preventing accidents, but about preventing serious injuries. And it fully accepts, therefore, the benefit of exposure for children to some degree of risk. If I can give you three scenarios here, and in which I'll try and illustrate the fact that children actually do their own risk assessments. In the first picture here with the child on the wall, there is about a meter drop into a small river on the other side of that wall. Now, this child on the way to the playground or the way to school would one day ask if they could climb up on the wall. They would perhaps for maybe the next 2 or 3 days, they would hold their mum or their dad's hand on the way there. But at some stage, that child, I pretty well guarantee, as in this case, would say, leave me alone, I can do it myself. In the second picture, a very agile teenage girl has managed to get up on this breakwater and carefully walk along the top of these posts. Now, she hasn't done this without considering the risk. And I pretty much guarantee that she would have considered what to do if she slips. She won't just fall aimlessly maybe like a footballer does and trying to get a penalty, but she would try and turn it into a jump. She would land on her feet. She would bend her knees to lessen the impact, and she would have considered the surface below. So she is actually doing a risk assessment without even knowing what a risk assessment is. And the risk leads to learning. It leads to self-protecting behavior, learning to manage the risk. In the third picture, this is in my home village in Port Patrick in the southwest of Scotland. And here we have children jumping off rocks into the sea, which is, we have a high tide, so it can be 1 meter deep, it can be 4 meters deep. They don't do this without some sort of learning beforehand, without considering the risk. Children don't jump off from the top straight away. They start jumping off from lower levels so they can see where they can manage it. They'll all have their own limit to what they want to do. They will have considered the tides. They will have considered whether the water is deep enough to jump in. If they don't know, if they're visiting children, they will talk to the local children and they will find out these things. The one thing they can't control is the temperature of the water, which is all year round, is pretty cold in Scotland. But certainly the children are learning in these ways, in the everyday way, to learning to manage risk and doing, as I said there, a natural risk assessment. So looking at this point, in the UK, the Health and Safety Executive, which is the quasi-statutory body that considers safety in all things from playgrounds to nuclear safety, they changed their position after some lobbying when we were starting to get very worried that children were being overprotected and not being able to develop this self-protecting behavior because they weren't giving enough challenge. So they then were convinced that we should have a more balanced approach. This is not a simple thing about factory safety, safety at work. This is a situation where there's some benefit to the children. And the idea is not to eliminate the risk, but to weigh up the risk and the benefits, as it says. So it accepts that accidents happen, but we should be able to look at the risk assessment in a different way for children's play and children's other sporting activities, for instance. This was developed further by the UK Play Safety Forum, that developed the concept of managing risk in play provision around a risk-benefit analysis. This benefit business was brought in to balance off against the risk. And the Health and Safety Executive, as illustrated in my last slide, talked about, it was declared, that it was a sufficient method to comply with the law, that we could balance risk and benefit. We didn't just have to look at the risk. Thus, we think that this has led to children becoming aware of their own limitations, developing self-confidence, and more importantly, developing self-protecting behavior, which is really important in an uncertain adult world, dealing with uncertainty. It's one of the most important things we have to teach children to do, to manage uncertainty and therefore manage risk, and as long as they can see the risk, of course. Michael mentioned I'm on the International Standards Organization, one of the technical committees, and we're just looking at this, what they call it benefit risk assessment rather than risk benefit assessment. And this is not just play, but it's in sport and other facilities and equipment. And the point of this work, and this will be published for comment, I think sometime in the summer, because we've just finished the first draft. This introduces a concept which acknowledges that in sport and recreation, including in play, there is an inherent trade-off between the benefit of the activity and the risk that it might pose. And in some circumstances, accepts this concept that exposure to risk may in itself be considered a benefit. And we're talking about not just about the benefit to the individual, but also society as a whole, in respect of social, physical, psychological, and health and well-being characteristics. Talk a little bit now about about inclusivity, because I think in being creative in relation to how you use the standard, we also need to be creative in relation to how we deal with inclusion of children with all abilities. At one time, it seemed to be that we were going down the route of accessibility, which really was focused on wheelchair users. And of course, this is a small minority of all those children that suffer from some disability or have to deal with some disability. We now more and more understand that there are many other characteristics, not all that we can see, that children suffer from that restricts their ability to join in with the rest of society's activities. And so we've moved really from thinking just about accessibility to inclusivity. And one of the things we have to accept in this is that children with disabilities also need challenge, graduated challenge. They're not going to stay in the same place. They also need to be encouraged to engage with other children and to gradually develop so that every child, whatever their ability, develops their full potential. So we're saying here that accessibility alone is not sufficient to create an inclusive play space. There's loads of other factors to take into account. It's not possible for every child to access every feature that we offer them in the same way. In fact, children, even if they've got full ability, do not necessarily have the same appetite for risk as other children. So we've got to, when we look at inclusive spaces, it's about trying to encourage anything that will get children to play together. When we've done surveys with children with disabilities and with carers of children with disabilities, the top 3 items that came out as features for a playground, none of them were about playground equipment. The first was about how to get there. You know, is it accessible and to actually get to the playground? The second one was about toilet facilities, because it's really important. And there's a concept that you may or may not be aware of now. The destination, if there's no way for comfort for the child that may need extra comfort than ordinary children, for changing, for example. But the third thing that was on the list of those things was playing together. So we have to find ways in which we can get children to play together, playing with other children in the same way, not only playing with their siblings, but the opportunity for simple things like trying to, what isn't a wonderful thing, for example, when a child comes back to the playground having said, I've met a new friend today. And this is one of the really important things for children with disabilities, the ability to play together with other children. It's very important. Helena mentioned the technical report about playground equipment accessible for all children, not to think about dumbing down the playground so everything's accessible to everybody. Disabled children should be welcomed. This is a quote from that standard, that technical report. Use play facilities jointly with other children. This is the togetherness that I spoke about. And so it's important that play areas are not dumbed down, and challenges for very able are still provided. So it's very important that I think that the main attraction should be accessible, and we should think about equivalent. You know, if there's something a child can't reach, if they're in a wheelchair, for example, there should be an equivalent activity at the level which they can reach. You know, height is a very difficult thing with wheeled vehicles, because just by ramps you need really lots and lots of space to get children up to a height. You can do it with landscaping, for instance, but again, it's expensive and difficult to do. But it's very often very important to offer children that can't reach the height the equivalent sort of experience on a level which they can access. Here's a picture, and this was drawn by probably the most famous playground designer in Europe, Günter Belzig, and this is quite an old one. It's 1987, I think he did this drawing. And it illustrates a little bit about the essence of creativity while using the standard. The same play equipment is in the 2 pictures, the actual picture and the picture of the dream of the child sitting at the edge of the playground. So the same equipment is used. it meets the standard, or should meet the standard. But what a wonderful difference between the fenced in area, which is plain and flat and all on the same level, as against the idea of the child's dream here with the same equipment, but landscaped in. So the first point about being creative is use the landscape, a playable landscape, as part of enhancing the playground experience for children. So that, it's just different levels, just being able to run down a slope or roll down a slope, just being able to walk across between one hill and another hill on a little bridge is a wonderful experience for children. So that's my first point of creativity. Back to inclusivity as well. It's about creating the right environment for children to play. The landscape architects are listening. I understand this. It's majority that's tuned in today. It's about how the atmosphere that you create is the sense of place that you create. Is the best thing that you can do to provide a good play environment for children and to get them to play together. And also for carers, if you create a nice atmosphere, the carer themselves will be a bit more relaxed and more likely to let the child take a few tender steps towards engaging with other children. We don't need to focus purely on the physical accessibility of children. We have to create the right atmosphere. Very importantly, that atmosphere should include niches where children can escape the hubbub of the noise and activity of children if they suffer from overstimulation in such circumstances. So little niches, little places to go to be quiet, other areas to go to fantasize, as well as just concentrating on the physical equipment and the strong activities of the equipment. The next point I would make about being creative is about managing expectations. People talk about playgrounds being safe. Helena has already mentioned that it's not just about safety, and there's no such thing as a purely safe playground. And that usually it's down to the wrong behavior rather than the equipment failing. But if we say to parents, here is a safe playground, then they expect it to be absolutely safe. And it's not possible to do that. If we say to them, we condition it in different ways, such as here. This is a little play garden inside a huge wall garden in a castle, Gordon Castle in the north of Scotland. And we actually made a sign at the introduction to the park that tells people that let your children go. This is for small children. This is for kindergarten children. Let your children go. The slope, the tree trunks, the rocks, and there's no fixed equipment here really apart from some water play. The natural features will allow the children to, in a relatively safe environment, to start understanding the texture of nature. So it's important for children, even at that early age, to learn to manage risks. And we're saying in the sign to parents before they go on this playground, the physical and mental health of your children will be better if you allow them to take risk, even the expense maybe of a few cuts and graces. So let them explore with a light parental touch and be able to remind yourselves of the benefit that a little risk can bring to your children. So we're turning the question on its head in a way, not saying it's safe, we're not saying it's unsafe, but we're saying let the children explore. And so the expectations are lowered. The children really can enjoy themselves. And from the repeat visits that we get to this playground, we know it's been successful. Next thing, Helena talked about height. And the maximum free height of fall in the playground standard is 3 meters. And that has to be then, the protection against falling is a barrier of 700 millimeters. So we all know that, but that doesn't limit you to only doing things of 3 meters high, platforms of 3 meters high. The requirement is protection against injuries from falling. You can go higher than that as long as there's still adequate protection against falling. This playground in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the big tower there is 10 meters high. Now, if you said, oh, you can't build anything higher than a platform higher than 3 meters, you would be constrained. You wouldn't be able to be creative as this and produce such wonderful equipment as this that children are really enjoying. They love height, mostly. The requirement is to protect against falling. So the barriers are much higher, even with sometimes a net on top to stop children climbing over the top. Because it's not in the standard, they look to other standards to see what the protection should be afforded. And in this case, or in these type of cases rather, the standard for the protection against falling from balconies in tower blocks was looked at. And this is much higher, of course. Now, why should it be any different if you have a tower 10 meters high? Why should you have any more protection than if you've got you're a 13-floor high tower block with a barrier? So this is the rationale behind that. So you can go higher, you just got to provide adequate protection against falling and perhaps look to other standards for that. The next thing I would say in looking to creativity is to think about the play types you want to afford the children when they're visiting the playground. Bob Hughes is a play theorist. He was a play worker that when he became an academic, he identified 16 different types of play behaviors that children display. They're not all active. Some of them are very active. Some of them are about fantasy. Some are about quiet times. Some are about communication. Some are about just social. Some are about drama. Some are just about, having just a quiet time on your own. So there's 16 play types, and these are outlined in more detail in his books. But think about when you're doing your design, how many of these play types I'm going to incorporate into my playground? And that would help stimulate what you've got to do. Many of you have trouble with the one about fire, but I mean, sometimes this is used even in public playgrounds in some countries, and it's allowable and controlled. So think about allowing children to engage in each one of these play types if it's at all possible in your design. So in a sort of summary about being creative within the standard, think about the landscape. Standard is for the equipment and the surfacing. What about the landscape? Are all the play types covered? It's very difficult to get them all there, but use it as a checklist. And the more you get in there, I guarantee you, the more children will be happy to visit and revisit the play area that you've designed. You can exceed the free height of falls to give extra challenge and extra excitement to children in the way in which I said with the illustration of Tulsa. Lower the expectations of the users and thinking it's absolutely safe. It's a place where children can go and to see risk, to learn to manage risk, to see risk, to understand the risk, and then to learn to manage risk. And think about this question about not just, when you talk about accessibility, not just be thinking about wheelchairs, but thinking about all children with all different abilities. Having said that, I'll give you this example in this picture about the child that came to the playground in a wheelchair. This is in North Dublin in Ireland. And this boy came with his mother and a friend to the playground and in a wheelchair. And this, of course, sand is quite inaccessible in a wheelchair, but they lifted him out of the wheelchair and put them on this little digger. And okay, that's quite hard work, but it was done. And this boy, for the first time in his life, experienced being at the center of a play activity. So there are challenges, there are obstacles, but sometimes these can be overcome. Don't just be absolutely constrained, and give the opportunity for the child and the carer to be able to choose how they engage with things, even if they think it's beyond their limits. Because the experience for this boy at the center of that activity, playing together with other children, was enough to make the mother sit and watch and cry with happiness that he'd had a wonderful day in his life and a first-time experience. And I think he was about 11 years old. So on that story, I would finish a little bit early, but I hope that means we've got more time for questions. I would thank you for listening to me. I hope you will join with us. And when I say with us, those ones campaigning on behalf of the rights of children to experience risk and to learn to manage risk. Join in and help provide the world which children are allowed to make decisions, to make first-hand experiences, to make friends, and to become free and happy individuals. Thank you very much. And I hope I haven't caught Michael by surprise by finishing a little early.
No worries, Harry. Thank you very much for also a very inspiring presentation. So let's proceed with a few questions. I would like to start with one question regarding the location of the play garden that was mentioned in your presentation, with those natural features and textures in Scotland. What's the name of this play garden, and where is it located?
It's located in Gordon Castle, which is in the northeast of Scotland, and it's open to the public. And it's in a huge walled garden. It's laid out very formally, but they gave us a little corner of the garden to allow something for children to be able to do when their parents or grandparents are visiting the garden. I could probably find a more geographic reference that I could let you have, Michael, if you give me a little time later on. But Gordon Castle should be enough. They'll have their own website, I'm sure.
You can please share it afterwards, Harry, and then we can address the person that asked for this specifically. So regarding this, what you started with, the international, the new international standard for sports and leisure, when do you think this will be implemented? You mentioned the first draft will go live this year. When do you think it will be implemented, and will it in any case replace the EN 1176 and 77, or is it an individual new standard?
No, this is, first of all, those that know standards know that they're not they move along at a snail's pace. You know, they're not rushed through the process. What I believe is that the first draft, which goes out for public comment, will be in the summer, and that will go to all of the members of the International Standards Organization through their national committees to be considered if they wish to consider it, to make comments about it if they wish. And then it'll go back in the process where the comments will be dealt with. So it'll maybe be about 18 months, if all goes well, before it actually becomes a full standard. It doesn't replace EN 1176. It's an additional tool in the toolbox, if you like, because and it's a way in which to deal with risk-benefit assessment, or as they've called it, benefit-risk assessment. Just introducing this concept because very importantly, it addresses all stages in the process. So you've got the design stage, if you like, you've got a playground design stage, a layout stage. You've also got the daily benefit risk assessment, a dynamic risk assessment. You know, what is this, for instance, has it snowed? Do I need to close the playground? Is it too wet? Is it too windy? Has a tree come down? So all the time, without doing reams and reams of paperwork, people that organize play areas, especially natural ones, are doing dynamic risk assessments. And this is a guide as to how to do that, really, and the thought process behind it and what you have to take into consideration, both on the side of risk and the side of benefit. So no, it won't replace the 1176. Don't worry, there's not a new standard to comply with when you're just getting used to the latest version of EN 1176. It's another tool, a helpful tool to bring the benefit into the risk assessment, because we are constrained by the risk assessment of health and safety experts that used to use it started to use it in industrial processes, and we don't want to be constrained by that type of application. That's why the benefit is in there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Harry. And Helena, was there anything there you wanted to add, or you have some input on this as well?
Yeah, well, I was listening to Harry, and that's exactly the thing, is that the standards will give us some criteria to follow, not a mandatory way to behave. But you have to be brave to be creative. You really have to know what kind of documents you're using. And this risk assessment means that you will take a decision on acceptable risk. And you can defend your views. You can say, yes, this is acceptable because of this and this and this. So it's very good that we have also this standard, let's say, that give you this criteria or a procedure. What should you think about for benefits, risks and benefits? I think it will really help to have, for professionals, for designers, to be braver, to not be afraid. And that was the topic of the whole webinar, that we should look at standards as these technical documents that are tools. Like if you need a screwdriver, what do you need to be able to offer these areas? So it's good that also this standard is international, because children are also international. Children are the same everywhere. So we should not have a standard for European children, a standard for American children. So it's good that we are trying with this international work to really put children at the center of our design projects. Children at the center, children's needs. And they really, I think there's an urgent need to address that, because more and more we live in this urban world. So we really have to give back to children opportunities so that they can become more confident adults. They know how to deal with chaos. They can manage risk in their lives. And we're not talking about risk of accidents, also emotional risks. There are many, many things. This is a very, I think, can be exciting topic.
Right.
If I may add also, Michael, it's also about demystifying this question about risk assessment and risk benefit assessment. You know, when we introduce concepts in the modern world, the first thing we get is hit with training courses that want to train people in it. Second, we get people becoming experts in the process. And then the danger is we rely on experts just to give us the answer. Now, we are all doing risk assessments as every day of the week. When you get in your car, you come to the first junction, you're making a risk assessment. Have I got enough time and space to get out across the road before that car comes? You know, we're doing this all the time. And children do this, as I illustrated in those 3 lovely pictures. Children doing this naturally. They're learning, they don't have to write down 5 pages of a risk assessment. It comes naturally. And so we have to encourage the idea that this is a process which is part of our natural development. Okay, if you have to do it in a more formal way, that's different. But certainly the mystique about it should be firmly knocked on the head.
And do you think, Harry, that the kids are equal in terms of their risk assessment here, or do you think that there is a variation, sort of a high level of variation between individuals in terms of risk assessments related with play?
I think there's a high degree of variation, yes. And it's also related to what some people call a risk thermostat. Okay, people will have a level of risk which they're prepared to go to. Okay, and they won't go beyond that. They'll be self-limiting. For instance, some children will always climb to the top of the tree, the topmost part of the tree they can get access to. Other children would rather sit under the tree. You know, children are different. They're all individuals. It's the thing, we should give them 2 things. We should give them the opportunity to do these things, and we should allow them to choose to do the things. The danger is if the parent chooses. Some parents, for example, if you lift a child up onto equipment that they couldn't not naturally get up on their own, you're putting the child in danger. They will decide if they're ready to do that. You know, I have to say that fathers are worse at this than mothers, but because they want their child to be big and strong. But the child will decide if they're ready to do it. They will. You know, I'll give you an illustration. Helena mentioned the old type of slides that some of them were very high. There was a ladder up one side and a slide down the other side. Okay. Exactly. When you got to the top of the slide, if you decided that was too high for you, you couldn't turn around and go back because there's 4 children on the ladder behind you and there's no space. Now we do slides coming off either off landscape thing or off a platform. So the child now can look down the slide, and if they decide, maybe tomorrow, or maybe when I'm a bit bigger, they step aside back onto the platform where there's plenty of room. And then the others can go down the slide. So the child's deciding. In the old slide, they couldn't decide. They were forced into doing something they didn't want to do. They will decide.
I really would like to add on this also about this free
sure,
choice.
Helena.
About this free choice in risk-taking. I think I mentioned that in my PowerPoint, because also this free choice means that they are concentrated. They know what they are doing. They are mastering their movement. And also very often accidents happen when they are concentrating, for instance, climbing on top of a tree or on a climbing wall, whatever. And then the mother or the father gets nervous and starts shouting at them, get out of there, do this or that. Or I've seen this in schools. And that's when the accident can happen, because then the child loses the concentration on what he's doing. He loses his focus. And then that's the dangerous part. That's when the adult gets scared and then scares the child. So really this free choice in risk-taking and allowing the child to really go at his own pace and to feel if it's the right moment or not. Can I do this or not? This is so important for safety, because really respecting the child pace and respecting the child perception. Okay, what is he doing? So as a parent or as a teacher or someone supervising children, you should be aware of your own emotions and not project your fears into when the child is trying to master his own skills, because that will completely take away the self-confidence of the child in its own abilities, in its own skills. Can I do this or not? If you have the parent that always coming, don't do this, you're going to fall, you're going to do this, you're going to get hurt. All this is really bad for the child to proceed with his exploring behavior. And that's what we want. And that's where the free choice comes in.
I'm just afraid, Helena, I have 3 kids myself in the range from 2 to 7. So I've visited now hundreds of playgrounds, not only related with work, and giving my kids the free choice and to do things in their own pace. We will never, ever leave the playgrounds. That's the challenge as a father.
That's another issue. And if it's a great playground, yes. So that's why it's also good when you design playgrounds that there is some activity for parents, so they don't get nervous looking at the children and have nothing else to do. So if the parents have something to do, well, children will love it, that they are not under watch. Like now you have cameras for everything, and the parents also are like cameras watching the children all the time. I think when we were free, not watched all the time, it's great.
Yeah, I think there was a report in Sweden where they analyzed playgrounds and looked into how popular they were, and one variable and one factor here that led to a very highly populated playground was the fact that it was located with a nice view. It was next to a barbecue station. So actually what you just mentioned, it's not just a playground for the kids, but also a playground for the whole family.
Mm-hmm. For me, that's very important. So that parents leave those kids alone. Does it ring a bell?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. So we have a question here for Tim Gill. He says, hi, Helena and Harry. What is your top priority for getting playground providers, especially municipalities, to take a balanced, thoughtful approach to playground safety? So if you want to start here, Harry.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And hello, Tim. Thanks for giving us a nice thorny question to answer. Tim and everybody, we've got to raise awareness. We've got to raise awareness about what's important. We've got to raise awareness about looking forward, not just to the little accidents that happen, which are immediate, but looking forward to what sort of society we want to bring our children up in. What sort of, turn it on its head perhaps and say, what are we doing wrong to produce children in the future that are too heavy, that are risk averse, that are unable to deal with uncertainty, therefore, because they've never been exposed to have to manage risk. And I think raising awareness about all these points, which Tim has spent a lot of time writing about, I know, and success, but we have to look for champions in each municipality that will take this question forward and translate that into what they want to do. And Tim will know better than I do that you've got to do this constantly. You can't just produce a report or a book and say, here's the situation, this is what you should do. Some people will grab it and say, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to follow the guidelines in this report, this book, or that book. You've got to keep the pedal to the metal. You've got to say constantly, this is what we need to do to get permanent change in the way in which we look towards our children playing generally, not just playing in playgrounds. And Tim's recent book about the urban playground illustrates that very well in relation to the fact that children play everywhere. As Helena has pointed out with our first slides, children play everywhere. We know that. Even on the steps of the museum, the most interesting thing is running up and down the steps for them sometimes. You know, if there's any water running in a municipality, you'd almost say, Tim started off in his first book saying, no ball game signs should be taken down. You should take the signs down saying, don't get into the fountain, for instance, or don't climb the statue. Put the statue off the plinth onto the ground so children can touch it and explore it. You've got to have municipal bravery. Mm-hmm. You've got to say to people, if you want to create a world in which children are given a better quality of life and thereby develop in a way which is not only good for their future, but for the future of humanity, then you've got to have this municipal bravery and take those steps like some mayors have done around the world to transform all that, not just in playgrounds.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Harry. And Helena, something you would like to add here?
Well, also, hello, Tim. It's lovely to have you around. And I was thinking about this top priority is also, yes, raising awareness is important, but also I think it would help a lot if you could develop with them a play strategy so that the municipalities don't decide on each playground as a case by case, but really if the municipality and maybe even nation has a play strategy that designers and even parents, schools can relate to, because this play strategy would include the child's needs. But this also requires emotional skills, the management of emotions for adults, because I think this is all around fear. That's why we don't have, when you talk, Tim asked about playground safety, as I think it was clear with Harry and I, playground safety means that it has the right balance, the right challenge for children. So I think we're talking about emotional skills so that adults can deal with their fears in a way that will not affect the quality of play provision. And if you have a well-designed play strategy, designed by everyone with participation from all involved, because it's very important that you don't impose a play strategy, but that you develop a play strategy where where all adults, the municipalities, designers, school teachers, everyone feels confident that this is good for children, then it is easier to really provide safer in this sense of with good risks for children. It will be easier if you have participation, and that's something we're still behind in involving really the public. So to give confidence also to parents to accept these more challenging areas. A play strategy is like a policy that you can follow when you design playgrounds. So the case-by-case issue is a problem because it's a different technical person there, it's different knowledge, it's different expertise, and your personal fears will be there all the time. If you have a policy that is really well developed with the children as the center of the interest is to really to provide for children, it's easier to make nicer playgrounds. So for me, this would be the top priority, develop play strategies suiting every community and giving confidence to adults.
Could I just give an example, Michael, if we have time?
Yeah, sure.
I'm working with a municipality in Scotland right now, and I'm on the team doing a master plan for a whole area. This is a partly woodland, partly grassland, surrounding a loch, that's a Scottish lake, in an area which at one end of the loch was an industrial steelworks. And this finished about, I don't know, 40 or 50 years ago, the steelworks, but it was, the remnants of that are still there. And they've decided that they want to create this whole parkland and woodland and loch lake into a destination play space, a destination place. So a place that people will go, both locals and visitors to the region. And they were very brave in that they, as part of the brief for the master plan, they said that play should be the driving theme of the landscape that we are creating, both the green landscape and the blue landscape, if you like, and the water, around the water. Now, so that gave us the green light to really go into how we would develop a play strategy that would result in the design of the whole landscape for the whole park. Now, the first thing we did was listen to children's voices. And there were 3 particular schools, primary schools, that's up to the age of 11, that we did intense work with them in relation to hearing children's voices. Where do you play? Where do you like to play? Where can you go? Where can't you go? Why can't you go there? Have you been to this park anyway? There's part of it already open to the public, but no play areas in it. What did you do there? How did you get there? All these things. And the children were also in their survey allowed, as well as in the talks we had with them, were allowed to draw something to input into the survey. The drawings actually gave us more information than the written stuff from the children. So that was the first thing. They got across lots of impressions that we didn't get from just the words they'd written down. Second, we then had a co-design workshop with people, with stakeholders in the area, so that they could tell us of their experience of the area and the park and their rich heritage. So then we start developing the play strategy, and we started off saying, why is play important? And we're bringing in all these aspects that we talked about today. Why is play important? Right back to the fundamentals about why play is important, citing a lot of research and quoting a lot of well-respected people in relation to why play is important, and then describing about how we could realize this. And it's the point that whole through the park, there'll be 2 main play areas, but both the play areas and the informal areas, in other words, play on the way throughout the rest of the park, whether it's woodland, the waterside, whatever, will all be based on this play strategy and why play is important and what we have to offer our children in relation to allowing them, access to risk and so on. So, this is one way in which we've done it to illustrate. It's intense, but it will have a lasting result. And the interesting thing, and following on from feedback yesterday, where we presented it to the municipality, they have already realized before they've started doing the work on the park that this will have much bigger impact in the whole of the municipality area, not just in the park area, because they're adopting this approach, and everybody and the community will be involved in making sure that this has an effect outside the park. So there's just a practical example, the current example of how we're trying to do it. But it needs a lot of work and a lot of pressure and a lot of raising awareness and a lot of rationalization about why it's really important. And in the end, a lot of money to deliver it up.
Right. Yeah, it's a highly, I mean, in terms of investment, you really need to invest the money. So one question that I have for both Harry and Helena, based on the visions you have within play for children, would you say that we are heading into a brighter future, that the trend is positive? Or would you say that the way we are proceeding with playground design nowadays doesn't really comply with your visions? So if you could please start, Helena.
what I said, so the brighter future is like, I think that younger people, they are really seeing that we are lacking these natural features. That's why people are really going to nature. So I think there is a brighter future, because I think people are seeing, and also from scientific, we like scientific papers nowadays, it's very important. We are getting young adults that are very anxious. And this anxiety also comes from not knowing how to deal with risks. So I want to believe, and it's a choice, that there is a brighter future, that people are waking up, and that display strategies, for instance, if they are developed, that would really help to have this brighter future for play. Of course, I think the biggest challenge is about urban areas, because you really, but also that it's becoming more and more, we are taking away, starting in some places, taking away cars and all this, the traffic that really make also children be so secluded, have to go to small places. So we need to go back to this idea that we live in a society all together. We don't live in small little boxes, old people here, young children here. I want to believe we have a brighter, we are heading to a brighter future for children. It's difficult to believe that when we see what's happening, even during this pandemic, and what happened in schools. But it will depend a lot on adults and on the existing adults, that they realize that they have a very important part to play in this brighter future. So even these kind of webinars, and I really appreciate this opportunity, I think they are helpful to raise awareness, to people wake up and think about your own childhood, especially for us, maybe older ones. We were very free. We didn't have adults looking at us all the time. We have to believe in children. Children are part of nature, like all of us, and they are equipped, they are born equipped with sensors also for survival. But we need to let them develop those antennas so that they can use them for survival. And they have to learn from a very early stage that they can survive on difficult moments. They will feel their hormones, they will feel adrenaline. They have to do it in safe environments when they're small, so that they become adults that can deal with stress. And we need to lower these anxiety levels that we have now, and people living on pills. And that starts in childhood. If you know how to deal with fear, with a panic attack, but the panic attack, like, am I going to fall from here? And then it's okay. Even if you fall, then it's just a little bruise. Oh, it was okay then. You have to learn that when you're small. So I want to see a brighter future. Yes, I want
Thank
to
you, Helena.
believe
Thank you.
that.
And for you, Harry, is this what you're seeing? I mean, if we look at where we're heading right now, would you say that we are going into the right direction, or would you say that there is a need for a shift in terms of the way people are thinking when they are planning and designing playgrounds?
If I didn't think we were going in the right direction, I would have retired long before now.
Exactly. What are we doing here?
It's the answer is yes and no, because it's these things develop not in a linear progression type of way, but in fits and starts, and some places I would say yes, they're doing really well. Other places I despair, and I think, oh no, they're putting the same things in and getting the same things out as they ever did. If you always do what you ever did, you'll always get what you ever got. And but I think there are, the world has been not the best place, and still is not the best place for many folk, even though it's the only place in these last couple of years especially. And the serious concerns about the damage that social media can do to children, or to everybody, when it's misused. But I think that the shoots of hope are growing well in some places, and couple the idea that about sustainability and play as well, natural play. These are go hand in hand, and children are becoming much more conscious about the environmental issues, and parents are listening to those voices. Perhaps they've forgotten in their hurried, busy lives, they've forgotten a number of things about when they were children, but they've also forgotten that there are other things important than being fast, doing things quick, doing things instantly, and earning more and more money. So I think there's lots of hope there. And the other thing is that, you know, remind people that children, playing is what children do. It's their work. They're not just adults in waiting to, they're not just waiting to be trained to be good adults. It's their life. Playing is their life. You know, it's what they naturally do. If you look across a whole range of mammals, which some scientists do, and show you that play is an inherent part of all mammals' lives, you know,
Right.
and it's really important. And there's loads of examples of how people are grasping this. There's certainly, as I said right at the beginning.
So I'm sorry, Harry, we need to just proceed now with the next topic, but thank you very much for your input. So we have now a quick poll for everyone to participate in. And there will be a few questions now addressed, or actually 2 questions addressed on your screen. So the first question is, which topic you would suggest for future Corkeen Talks? Would you be interested in discussing microplastics from playgrounds, hazardous and hazardous chemicals and toxics in playground equipment and safety surfacing, LCA analysis, meaning life cycle analysis from playground equipment and safety surfacing? If you're interested in the cork history and the characteristics of cork, or if you have a different topic, feel free to write this topic also in the chat. And the second question, it's related with what you believe is the most important development for the Corkeen system right now. If we should focus on a bio-based binder, if we should introduce the colored granules, meaning that we can add at least one color tone to the top layer granules, meaning you can design it in a different way. If we should proceed in developing an environmental product declaration, so it's the next step after the LCA, or if you have any other suggestions for an interesting development. So feel free now to click in the box you believe is the right one, and if you have any other topics, feel free to address them also in the chat. And within the next 15 seconds, we will close the poll, and then we will present to you the conclusion, the results of this poll based on everyone that is participating. So feel free to just finish this poll. Okay, I think we should now present the results.
I can see there's some comments in the chat.
Yeah, good, Helena. That I can mention also comments from the chat. Well, people say that they can't register their vote.
But there are two proposals before.
Right, new shapes and different thickness of cork modules. Thank you very much for that, Madalena. And then we have, I'd like to see more risk. I would like to see more on risk benefit, and would be happy to talk on this and on environmental sustainability in relation to safety surfacing, from Tim Gill. And regarding the poll itself, let me check the results. Could we please have the results again? If it's not possible to have the results, we will send them to you also afterwards in a follow-up email. Well, here we go. So microplastic seems like an interesting topic, together with hazardous chemicals. within equipment and safety surfacing. We have on the second question, the most important development would be a bio-based binder. So this is something we are working on right now, but it's interesting to see also that a lot of you voted for the bio-based binder for the Corkeen system. So thank you very much for your participation in this poll. So now we have a few minutes just to summarize this first Corkeen Talks event. First of all, I'm very grateful for Helena's and Harry's participation. I think it's been a great webinar, and this is definitely just the first in a set of future webinars. Regarding conclusions, I think from my point of view, it's clear that we should give back the sort of the rights to the kids and give the kids a lot more space to develop themselves and not just be pinpointed with the adults from the adults. I do have the impression that we do see a brighter future here, that we are implementing those visions in the future of playground design. And I also would like to emphasize on what you mentioned, Helena, the fact that we shouldn't skip the introductions when reading the standards. We are sometimes fully focused on the sections of the standards themselves rather than trying to understand the background of those standards. And we need to understand that play is not risk-free. We have to be challenged as kids in the playgrounds. And it's actually a child's right. I think it was you mentioning this, Harry, a child's right to take risks. It's even mentioned in the conventions from the UN. I like your ideas of not getting limited to a equipment height of 3 meters, considering the fact that we actually expose kids to a risk in a balcony, as an example. And what would you say, Helena and Harry? What are your takes from this first session, this first Corkeen Talks? If you can please start, Helena.
Well, I think it was a very, very interesting webinar, especially talking about this need for risk that children have. And I would like to highlight the issue of communities starting to develop these play strategies, because it gives you much more bravery and confidence to build, create more challenging areas. And I also would like to finish by saying that the introduction and the scope of 1176 Part 1 is freely available online, because normally you'll have free previews of the standard. So everyone here, if you want, you can read online the introduction and the scope of the standard. And I really would encourage you to do it, if that will give you a boost in your courage to start creating better places for children.
Thank you very much, Helena. And Harry, you will have the last words here in terms of your conclusions from this first event.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the big question is moving from listening to people like me and Helena and making changes in your own situation, moving from the theory, if you like, to the practice. And one thing we touched upon was about municipalities being braver. I think you need to find politicians that will be play champions, that really get the point about play being important and risk management, allowing children to take risks being important. Normally, politicians grab hold of playgrounds when there's an accident happened and they're demanding for something to happen. We must not let this happen again. And and very often that's right, that those things should be looked at and see whether anything's been done wrong. But that creates the wrong environment. That raises the anxiety. That wants people to say, oh, we better make it even more safe, otherwise we'll get sued, we'll be in trouble. So I think you need play champions in every municipality that will take it forward and really say, let's look at it from a child's point of view. And when we look at, as I said before, what's good for children is good for humanity.
I think that's great words. So, and hopefully we have a few play champions in among the participants today. So they will be part of the creation of the future playgrounds for our next generations. So with those words, I would like to thank everyone that participated during this first Corkeen Talks. And we will also get back to you, and hopefully we can send you the full version of the video with the high resolution as well. And if you meanwhile have any questions, feel free to address them here in the chat, or if you would like to, you can always send an email to info@corkeen.com, or get in direct contacts with anyone from the Corkeen team. And until the next Corkeen Talks session, I would like to say have a great time, and let's hope we will see each other soon again. Thank you, everyone.